And I am joined by my dear friend, Jonathan Crow, and we will just start by giving a few territorial acknowledgements about where we are both situated today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am gathered is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. My guest, violinist Jonathan Crow, is situated on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce our guest to Take Note Happy Hour tonight. It is violinist Jonathan Crow. He is originally a BC boy. We just want to make that clear. You are one of ours. Right. Jonathan has been the concertmaster of the Toronto Symphony since 2011. Has it been 10 years?
I know, it's kind of hard to believe. It just feels like yesterday that I moved here.
It does. That's a long time. 10 years, it flies.
Yeah.
And so Jonathan has been the concertmaster of the Toronto Symphony since 2011. He's a native of Prince George, British Columbia, and he earned his Bachelor of Music degree in honors performance at McGill University, and he continues to perform as a guest concertmaster and soloist and chamber musicians all around the country, the continent, and the world. Welcome to our podcast, Jonathan. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
Great. We'll just make sure we're both recording our audio on a separate device.
Got it.
Awesome.
There you go, yeah.
Awesome. And I'm recording on my computer too. We want to thank our sponsors for this podcast, which is Tom Lee Music. They give us this fancy podcast microphone, which you can see here. So Jonathan, we're going to begin our chat today with a few really fun questions. You have to answer the first word that comes to your mind.
Okay, I'm ready.
Mozart or Beethoven?
Beethoven.
Oh,
no question. Year. I can see it on the wall behind you. Right? So you like you led me in a certain direction.
Subliminal messaging from WQXR, yeah, exactly. New York. Okay, there's no subliminal messaging about this one. Debussy or Ravel?
Ravel, but Beethoven.
Ravel,
Can I just say Beethoven again?
You could say Beethoven again.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Opus 132 or 135?
131. Greatest. That has to be part of the question.
different answer. So 131 is very special because it's 7 movements, but like they're not actually movements.
Yeah, straight through. I mean, it's the greatest thing, in my opinion, that Beethoven ever wrote. And I'm sure we'll get to this later about string quartets, but like, you know, him developing his entire life basically to get to this piece, experimenting with the quartet, how things work, different movements. And then like 131, it's like, he's like, what more could I possibly do? So then 135 is like, well, I'll go back to 4 movements and relax a little bit.
I'll chill out before I leave the space. I'll relax. Okay, so another question. Maple Leafs or Montreal Canadiens?
You know, that's a great question. I'm going to get lynched for this. I grew up in Prince George, of course. And so as a kid, I wanted to watch the 4 o'clock game because then I would go to bed. And at the time I was growing up, I got every single Habs game on TV on French on the Radio-Canada. And I didn't get all the Maple Leafs games. So I grew up a Habs fan because those were the games that I watched. And then I moved to Montreal and I remain a Habs fan. I used to be a rabid anti-Leafs fan, right? Because if you love the Habs, you have to kind of hate the Leafs. It's one of these things. But since moving to Toronto, I've it's kind of dimmed a little bit. I see so many people that love the Maple Leafs so much and want to see them do so well that I can't really take pleasure in seeing them lose anymore. So definitely a Habs fan, but I would be happy to see the Maple Leafs do well, but not at the Habs expense.
It's funny how living in a city can actually influence your sports choices, because I am a Calgary Flames fan in my childhood and early adulthood. And when I moved here, I made a point of being that obnoxious Flames fan at the Canucks games. And then that didn't go so well for me.
I wonder why. It's hard to root for the unhappiness of your friends at a certain point. It's like, I don't want to root for all my friends to be like deeply disappointed when they get knocked out by Boston again, horribly, right? I mean,
can we just agree that Boston is literally the worst?
Yes, no, we can all hate Boston, and that's fine, and they deserve it.
Except for that beautiful symphony they have.
Well, that's different. Yeah.
My last question is two questions in the rapid fire round. What's your favorite meal after a concert?
Favorite meal after concert? Beer? Is that a meal? It can
Yes,
be.
it
A
has
beer. A
it has
beer after concert is an amazing thing. And it's something that I haven't done for basically exactly a year. Do a concert and then go for a beer with friends. I've done concerts, I've done live streams, but every single one of them has been me going home afterwards by myself. It's kind of like, oh, the ritual has just disappeared.
And you're not the first person to mention that to me, that this whole post-concert celebration that we so look forward to, it's sometimes the only time we've seen people in 2 or 3 years, where we just get together after and celebrate the music and celebrate being in each other's company. That's no longer with us anymore.
Yeah, I mean the whole concert scene is really ritualistic. I mean, if you go to the symphony, you get there and you hear the symphony on stage just playing. And I didn't realize until recently how special that was. We went back with the TSO and for the first time last week, I think it was, did some real kind of full orchestra stuff. And I heard all my colleagues warming up and I was like, oh, oh, I forgot about this, right? And then the walkout when people clap and all of these kind of rituals that are part of going to a concert are very, very hard to recreate on the live stream. We've seen so many live streams where people walk out to dead silence, right? And then personally, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, should I bow? Should I just pretend I'm alone in a studio? I'm not quite sure. So I often do some sort of awkward like half bow and then turn around quickly and hope that nobody noticed. But of course, it's recorded on the internet for everybody to look at. And it's just
For
such a
all
strange
eternity.
thing. Yeah.
When you now you just did the Beethoven septet. That's why you're picking Beethoven, because you just did a septet with your colleagues.
Well, it was Beethoven's birthday and he missed it. I feel bad for the guy. Like all of these things that were supposed to happen last year for Beethoven are just kind of gone.
Yes. And including you and Phil were supposed to come to us in Vancouver.
That's right. Yeah.
That was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Phil and I were just in Quebec City at the Palais Montcalm recording Beethoven for the summer. So that was really nice to get to play, but not the same as doing it for an audience and, having the feeling of a concert. Recordings are a very different beast than concerts.
They are.
The idea of a concert as a moment in time that can never be recreated. And for good or for ill, it's one moment. And sometimes you catch lightning in a bottle and it's the most amazing thing. And then sometimes it's not, which is fine too. But the feeling of being in the audience, being just part of a moment in time, which just exists all by itself, has totally disappeared with the idea of live streams, which then can be archived, right? And then you can decide, well, maybe I'll go watch it later. But then, of course, we never do, because it's like, well, you forget, something else comes up. There's no kind of like destination viewing anymore, right? You just like,
have a beer and you forget.
Yeah.
Now, this is really interesting you brought this up, because I've been asking people in the industry sort of, once this is all over, and it will be, apparently teachers get vaccinated in BC in April.
I know, congratulations.
Thank you. Am I excited? Sure, I'm excited. It'll be good. And I feel like I've been asking, should we continue having our live events broadcast? Because this is one way, for example, if people come from Toronto or Montreal or New York to play in Vancouver, their friends back east can watch. But like you said, a concert is a moment in time. It can't be replaced.
Yeah.
And we've seen some beautiful recordings, which we'll get into later. We've seen some beautiful online material. And I've been so grateful to watch you in the TSO. I've watched a few concerts. I've been so grateful to watch Andrew and Brian in the OSM. I saw Naomi do her conducting and soloist debut at the Winnipeg Symphony. And it's been amazing, but also I miss hearing that oboe give the A.
Yeah.
And you hear the whole sound.
I mean, it's not a recreation of the live experience. It's a totally different experience, and it can be a great experience. Mm-hmm. And the joy is it gives access to people that otherwise never would be able to go to a concert, right? Concerts in Care is doing recorded concerts for people in old folks' homes who would never be able to get to Roy Thompson Hall or the Orpheum. And that's incredible, right? Using the technology to create access for people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to go to classical music kind of specifically is incredible. And if we can take one thing out of this, it's for me, it's continuing that. But I don't think the recreation of the live experience is something that can be done with technology. And I think we should do different things with technology. Recordings are great, curated digital things where you can do all kinds of different stuff and bring in, slides. You can bring in a composer who lives in a totally different continent to speak about her piece before. That's incredible. And I think, the direction that people are going and finding creative ways to add something that's different from the live experience are great, and not necessarily trying to be like, well, this is just as good as a concert, you better like it, because it's not the same.
No, and we've had a lot of fun because we've been able to talk to artists with whom we have a good relationship in different cities, and meet videographers and audio engineers in different cities. Shout out to Stealth and Matt if you're listening in Toronto. They're like literally our favorite people.
Yeah.
They just do the best work, period. It's incredible. So we've had a lot of fun being able to bring some of our favorite out-of-town musicians to our virtual audience and have fun with interviews. And I think what you said is key, is it's not a replacement. It's a completely apple and orange.
Yeah. And it can absolutely add on to the live concert experience, right? The idea of getting to know artists a little bit better before a concert, so that you feel when you see a concert that you know them a little bit more. That's an amazing thing, right? And being able to bring people together in the comfort of their own home during, it's not probably all that brutal weather in Vancouver right now, but it's just beautiful. But I was in Quebec City and it was pretty cold. I wouldn't have minded watching a concert from the comfort of my own home and thinking, wow, I can't wait to go back and see this artist live, because this has just kind of whetted my appetite for, again, that concert ritual, the social aspect of it, getting to do it with people, being part of a shared moment. And I think that's the hardest thing, is to feel like you're sharing a moment over the internet, right? It's hard to know. I have no idea how many people are watching this right now. And there's no way to tell, right? It's like, and I don't know whether I'm just speaking to you and only you, or thousands of people. And the nice thing, if you're at a concert hall, you see the audience and you interact with the audience, you play for them, and you play differently because they're there responding. And that back and forth is much, much harder to capture over, fiber optic cables.
It's true. And that's why we've been really trying to find the best way to have a paywall for our really hardworking material and the concerts we've had. So we've really tried to have a paywall, but we also realized we want people to be able to chat during the premiere. So we've had to use YouTube Premiere. And I know that for Toronto Summer Music Festival, you were premiering on Vimeo, and we were all able to roast Phil at the same time.
But the funny thing is, right, there's a huge kind of dichotomy between the people that love the chat and wanted to be kind of talking to the artists, and the people that were just like, can you please turn off the chat? It's so incredibly distracting. I don't want to see it. I did a live Zoom concert for Toronto Symphony donors from my house. Right when Toronto got kind of locked down in January, we had to cancel a live event. Wasn't live, but it would have been a chamber group that could rehearse together and stream, and that had to get canceled. So I replaced it with a live thing from my living room, and it was on Zoom, right? So I could see the chat popping up every time somebody had something to say, and it was amazing because there were so many people that were like, "This is so great! I'm so happy to be able to do this." But basically, the chat degenerated into people saying "Stop chatting! It's distracting me," and then other people "But I like the chat. This is fun. I'm talking to my friends, right?" And I think that's hard. It's hard to find that mix, and this is
disable. They can click disable.
I know, exactly. But this is, it's interesting. It just brought out a little bit faster some of the issues facing classical music. The people that are the diehards that like the concert experience to be a certain way, that the ritual that they're used to, and you go to the symphony and it's a quite kind of formal event, and it can be wonderful. And then you get a different crowd that no, I don't want to dress up like that. I want to go and have fun, and I want it to be kind of easy and hip, right? And finding a way to keep all of those people interested in the same event is very hard.
And I don't think when we come back to quote unquote real life, when we come back to in-person full capacity theaters in about 9 months, a year or longer, we don't know yet. I'm not putting any predictions on anything anymore because I realized I just don't know.
No point in trying. Yeah.
So, and I feel actually the same people are not going to come to the same events anymore. I think that we are going to have sort of different crowds coming to different events because I've seen that we can't tailor it all to the same tastes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's fine, right? I think we make a mistake trying to say that this is for everybody, and the same way that we do something, everybody should like it, because they don't. And it's absolutely fine to be like, no, this is going to be a formal chamber music concert with Beethoven 131, and it's going to be super intense, and nobody's going to speak from the stage, and we're all going to wear tails. That's great. Yeah. Or it's fine to be like, no, we're not going to do 131. That piece is very long. It's 40 minutes without a break. And it's super intense. If you've never heard Beethoven before, you're going to be like, what is this? And you might not really enjoy it. And that's also fine. Yep. You know, but in classical music, we don't always do a good job of making people feel good about liking it, but we often do a good job of making people feel bad about not liking it, sort of thing. And like, well, I didn't enjoy that, and people made me feel bad because I should be smarter or something, right? And the idea of having different ways of presenting the music tailored to different audiences, different kind of experience groups is fine. And I think it's good.
And I won't name where this happened. I consider myself fairly well-versed in classical music at this point, and well-versed in a formal and informal concert experience. And I had a formal concert experience in a chamber music setting that made me feel alienated because it was too serious. And if this is making me feel alienated for it being too serious,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how other people were feeling. We want to dig into a little bit about like how you got from, you know, Prince George to Montreal and now concertmaster of Toronto Symphony. So once you finished at McGill, and I actually don't know these stories, so I'm looking forward to this. You joined the Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal. You were associate principal second. What was it like with your first job after university?
So I won the job in October of my third year of university. So I think it was 19. And this is one of those things, it's a horrible story. It's kind of hateful, right? I was this stupid kid. I knew nothing. There was no pressure. I'm like, what's an audition? And so I didn't have any nerves. I wasn't like, my life is riding on this. I have a mortgage. I have kids. So like I was super not stressed. And there's a huge advantage to doing an audition when you just really don't care whether you win, when you're doing it for the experience of doing an audition. So then I won the audition. I was like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to take this job. I haven't even finished my undergrad. And the personnel manager was like, not happy. He's like, okay, you have to understand how an audition works. You have to understand how many people are involved and how many people are now deeply disappointed. And, you know, at the end of the day, it wasn't that hard to convince me to take an amazing job with an amazing orchestra. And I was able to finish my bachelor degree fairly fast, so I was still able to graduate. Although McGill University didn't let me count the Montreal Symphony as orchestra. So for a while, I was doing both the McGill Symphony and the Montreal Symphony so I could get my orchestra credit.
The irony is not lost on me.
It was pretty amazing. I think the first concert I played was Zubin Mehta conducting Mahler 2 with Henriette Schellenberg. The second concert I played was Dutoit conducting, wasn't Alpine, no, it was Don Quixote with Truls Mork on cello. Like, I mean, you can learn a lot. I was like thinking like maybe I should go do a master's somewhere and, you know, get better at playing the violin and learn more about music. Maybe that would have made me better at playing the violin, but you can learn a lot from being up front when Zubin Mehta is conducting right there, when Martha Argerich is playing the greatest piano stuff ever written, and you're kind of like 3 feet from her and seeing the interaction between her and the conductor and how they work. So, you know, incredible learning experience. I would say I was very lucky to join an orchestra the way I did, because normally you join an orchestra and you can win a section job. But if you join an orchestra, often you just win a concertmaster job or something. And it's becoming more and more common that you get these kind of like, you know, prodigies fresh out of university that win a concertmaster job and then immediately are supposed to tell people that have, you know, 30 years of experience on them and have been doing it all their lives. You're supposed to get in there and tell people what to do and be like, well, now we're going to do this going and this is how it works, when you actually have no idea what's going on. So the way I joined was, I think, just perfect. I was in the front stand of the second violins, but I was not a principal. I didn't have to say, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do that. But it was a title position. So I got to learn from my colleagues around me how I was supposed to interact with the rest of the orchestra, how I was supposed to interact with the conductor, and work all these things out. And I got to be close to the front, which means that I got to be like really close to all the soloists, which is great. You can hear them well. You can see how they interact with the rest of the orchestra. You can just see how they play. And that's amazing. And I love that I didn't have to jump in and be a concertmaster from the very beginning, especially I think I was 20 when I, kind of officially started the job. It's not a natural way to do it. In sports, you don't call up the prodigy and immediately put them on the first power play their first day on the team. They sit in the bench for a while, and that's just fine.
Unless they're Sidney Crosby.
But I suspect his ice time was not up there with who would have been at the time with Jagers. And did he cross over the Jager? Probably not.
Oh, I think he did a little bit.
He did?
Yeah.
Lemieux would have told him all this stuff to do anyway. But it was a very natural way to join an orchestra. And it was very, it makes a lot more sense perhaps than this way of winning an audition for a specific job, and there being no way that there's any flexibility within that. There's no way that you can kind of move up to a different job, or even be like, you know what, I don't want the stress of doing this anymore. I want to be the Joe Thornton in Toronto, and I'm going to go back to my hometown team and not play, 30 minutes a game, but get to like kind of lead all these young guys and teach them how to play hockey. We lose that a bit in classical music because everything is so rigid the way the jobs are set up.
I'm just loving the hockey analogies because I'm just getting them all. It's amazing. Now,
anyway, very briefly, a colleague of mine retired about 6 months after I joined the orchestra. He was the associate concertmaster, and I won the audition for that job as well. And so moved into the first violins, which was great because the first violin parts are more difficult. So It is important to kind of start learning them as soon as possible, especially learning them at an age where you still learn things fast. You learn music a lot faster at 20 than you do at 43, I'll tell you. And then 3 years later, I was appointed concertmaster. And this was right around when Charles Dutoit left the Montreal Symphony.
And did you find that there was a big period of growth in your first years as concertmaster of OSM?
Yeah, for the first 2 years, I was lost for almost the entire time. I remember going on tour. We went to South America in the summer of 1998, and we played Ravel's La Valse on tour. And I think we played it 15 times before ever rehearsing it, right? Because the orchestra basically had this piece memorized at the time.
Yeah.
But as a young person trying to play La Valse, I didn't even know what line to play on, right? It's not even that I couldn't play the notes. So like a lot of that piece has 4 divisi lines, and then there'll be 3, then there'll be 2, and it'll be this. I didn't even know where I was supposed to play. And my stand partner kind of like pointed out to me really quickly, this is in the middle of an encore. Right? And then finally we rehearsed it, and I was like, okay, I can kind of figure out what's going on. But I was literally on stage like, I don't even know where I should be playing. And now when I play La Valse, I'm that person. I'm like, oh, it's memorized. This piece is super easy. Why is anybody having trouble with this, right? There's something just about doing things over and over. And when you join an orchestra, you haven't played the repertoire. You haven't done all the pieces. And so every single thing is new, and it's overwhelming. And 2 years later, suddenly you're like, oh, wait, this piece is coming back. I've done this piece before. You get it. And it's like, it happens fast. But when you're first in a band, you're learning everything for the first time. And it's incredibly stressful. And there's a lot of repertoire. And it's amazing because nobody else seems to be struggling. You look at everybody else and they're like, oh, this is fine. At break, they're all like chatting and hanging out. And I'm like desperately like on stage trying to figure out.
And you're like, is it just me?
Yeah, is it just me? It's like, why is nobody else struggling here?
So what you're telling me is that the Scheherazade concertmaster solos, you're good to go now?
Those are good to go. I think I've played that like 25 times in the past 5 years. But the first time you play it, you're like, you have to start. And it's kind of like, oh, everybody's waiting for that one note. This is really hard. And now it's like, oh, Tuesday.
Yep, it's great. Now, you have been the soloist with some pretty amazing conductors, Charles Dutoit, Yehudi Menuhin, Andrew Davis, Peter Ungen. I have to ask about your experience performing with Menuhin. That's incredible. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
So I played with Menuhin, a wonderful artist named Myfanwy Pavlich, lived in Victoria at the time, and she was a friend of Lord Menuhin's. And in his typical way, he's like, I would like to do something nice for you all. I will come to Victoria and conduct a benefit concert for whatever you choose.
Wow.
And so she's like, well, why not the symphony? And they're like, are you joking? Yes, that would be incredible. And so he said, well, I'd like to work with a young local artist. And so at the time I was living in Victoria, and I had been lucky enough to perform with that orchestra. So they called me up and said, hey, do you want to come play with Lord Yehudi Menuhin? And I'm like, I thought I was being pranked. We're not going to pay you. And I'm like, that's okay. I'll pay you to do that. But I remember really vividly, I played Tchaikovsky concerto and I went to his hotel and he wanted to go through the piece with me before the first rehearsal with the orchestra. The concert rehearsal was the next day and the concert was the next day as well. So
Wow.
we went through the entire piece and he was lovely, very kind and very supportive and said, oh, it's so wonderful. You play so well. And then we proceeded to go through the piece and he would, basically gave me a lesson and suggested all these things. And it was incredible. It was only about halfway through that I realized, oh, wait, he wants me to change these things for tomorrow. He's not like, you should think about this in life. He's like, no, you should do an upbo. And it's like, do this upbo here. And he's like, he was expecting me to kind of switch it overnight. And it made me realize like, he just didn't understand that I wasn't him, right? He was always able to just do anything on the violin. Like as a 16-year-old, he'd be like, play this. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. And then he'd just play it with a different fingering and be fine. There was no like, I need to go practice it first. I need to work it out. Like my brain only goes to a certain speed. And he just didn't really comprehend that I wasn't working on the same level as he was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Do you still have those bowings and fingerings from that Tchaikovsky lesson?
That's a great question. I have to go look through my old parts to see whether I kind of like mark them in like blood or anything like that.
Oh, that is very, very cool. And of
So if I were
course,
him, I'd probably remember them even now. But
Andrew Davis, a very special conductor for the Toronto Symphony.
yeah, I mean, Andrew Davis has been great, and he was actually conducted the very first concert I played with the TSO. Peter Ungen was the music director at the time, and he called me maybe 3 years earlier to say, hey, do you want to come try out for the Toronto Symphony? I'd known him from years back at a festival I went to. And at that point I was like, no, I've just started a new job in Montreal and my kids are really young. It's not a good time for a move. So time went by, they didn't have anybody to fill the job. And he called me up again and said like, look, just come play a concert with the orchestra, see what it's like. And the one that it worked out for me to go play was Andrew Davis conducting Alpine Symphony of Strauss. And so that was my first experience with him or with the TSO. And it was lovely because the orchestra just loves him so much. It was just like this whole family, and he would kind of make jokes and smile. And they were like, oh, we love you, Sir Andrew. And I was just like, wow, this is such a collegial group. It's really a nice atmosphere and a nice ambiance. And like, he's at the point in his career where he has nothing left to prove. He's done everything that you can do. He just wants to come and have a good time and make good music with friends. And that's the nicest thing about working with him, is that it really is just like friends on stage enjoying themselves.
And that's kind of what it's all about. And I think a lot of people, they miss that with all of these competitions, and now Kiwanis and all these things have gone virtual. I've had a few of for our listeners who might not know, I teach grade 5 French immersion along with organizing concerts. I could do a podcast on how I manage that, but nobody would listen, and it's really boring. It's called Don't Sleep.
Applications 101.
Yeah, literally. So I've had a few of my students in class, their parents have emailed me and they said, we hear you're a piano teacher and we've made 6 recordings for this Kiwanis class. We don't know which one to pick. And I'm like, it's literally RCM level 4 Baroque class for 10-year-olds. And they made 6 different recordings. And I'm like, you're missing the joy.
Yeah. I think in music lessons these days, a lot of times people do it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it for a result. And at the end of the day, I don't think music lessons for kids, the result doesn't matter at all. It's the process that matters. Learning to play an instrument is amazing. Being able to get up on stage in front of people and kind of with composure do something really difficult in real time, that's incredible. Whether it actually goes well is not all that important, right? The process of being able to train for something and being able to challenge yourself and get up on stage and do it, and then learn from what didn't go well or learn from what did go well, that's incredible, right? Yeah. But the idea that there being a necessary result and like, well, I got an 89, so I'm not as good as the person that got a 90. I mean, that's just ludicrous. And that's not what any training is about. No. You want to go back to hockey and sports, right? And this is more baseball, right? So in baseball, they're looking at people. They don't actually really look at your batting average anymore, because they're like, wow, that's a little bit random. It's a bit lucky if you get that. But you look at the process, and you're like, if you do it the right way over a long period of time, it'll even out. And then maybe the results are important. But any one specific result is just such a small sample size. It's not the point.
This is a really really great segue. I like the baseball analogy. Go Blue Jays. This is
Excellent.
great. Yeah. Oh no. We miss them.
Yeah, we
Um,
missed the Expos.
we
Paid well.
do. We like to talk about music education on this podcast, and you joined the Schulich School of Music at McGill, and you were a prof there till about 2010. And a lot of your former students and current students have had a lot of success in some competitions and earning jobs after school is ended. And now you're associate professor at U of T in Toronto. So you've already kind of given me an outlook on your philosophy of teaching, that it's about the process, whether the student wins a job, wins a competition, gets distinction on their jury or gets honors on their jury, however they grade them, isn't the point. The point is, did you become a better fiddle player?
Or
And
not even just a better fiddle player, a better person or a more educated human being that will have interests that are kind of wide ranging and get them like success in something.
do you find a lot of kids are coming to university with like a one-track mind about music and their career, and they have no sort of concept of like they need to be?
I would actually say it's almost the opposite. When I was, I'm probably about the last generation of people that went to school and said, "Oh, I'm going to win an orchestra job," and it was kind of a realistic ambition because there were enough jobs. My students are incredibly creative and have all kinds of ideas about jobs that they'd like to do that I didn't really even know existed and didn't exist when I was in school. And so that was kind of like a worry when I started taking a teaching job at a university. I'm like, well, my job is now to train classical violinists. That's a tough thing to do in the field where jobs for classical violinists are just kind of dwindling. And this is before a pandemic where they're just kind of like, demolished.
Yeah.
But I was really, really pleasantly surprised by one, the dedication and also the creativity of my students. And I would say that of my students that have had a true desire and dedication, 100% of them have succeeded in getting a job in something related to kind of what they want to do with the violin. It's not all soloists. It's not all, I'm going to play in this orchestra, but all of them have found a niche. And that's the most amazing thing, of people that are finding different niches for themselves, music therapy, music and health. Some of them switch and become singers and are so happy because their pitch is great. There's a lot of different things to do out there. And it's like any other job, just because there are fewer orchestra jobs doesn't mean there isn't room for artists. And I think we're seeing this in the pandemic, right? I mean, it's been a really tough time for classical artists.
Oh, yes.
And everybody's like, well, you should go and retrain and you should do all these different things. And then they go home and watch Netflix. And then they go home and watch all of these different shows, which are produced by artists around the world. And there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? That people don't realize, well, almost all of the things that we're doing in our free time right now are all artistic. And maybe that's a marketing problem, that we don't do a better job of explaining to people what we do, which is quite possible. But I can't even imagine where I'd be without the opportunity to listen to podcasts, to watch live streams, to watch really cool TV shows for a long time on a night where you're particularly depressed.
Yep. Have you found this pandemic challenging, or you've been pretty busy? You've been recording a lot, probably online teaching, but have there been some times where you've been like with your own thoughts and it's been difficult?
Yeah, I mean, the very beginning, before we all figured out what was going to happen, and once we gave up thinking like, well, maybe next week I can go back to work, when it became clear, it's like, oh, we're definitely not going back to work till September. So that was kind of like last April.
Yeah.
That was a little bit rough, because it's like, well, I don't really know what to prepare for. This is before people had figured out the whole live streaming, and it's like, okay, we got to do something because this is lasting for a while. We still all thought, well, September will be back to normal. That was kind of tough. But I disappeared into my shed and started making cutting boards. It was kind of my pandemic project. I started building things so that I could do something. So that I make these like kind of maple and walnut cutting boards and stuff. And I got a little brand, which my daughter Sabina.
Oh my goodness.
Big crow. So that was actually kind of nice. And I didn't do anything with them. I just again, it wasn't about the result. It was about the process. And so at some point I went to my shed. I was like, I got 40 cutting boards sitting here. So I drove around and gave them to people. I gave them to a bunch of friends at the symphony, and, a few board members that I was particularly close to, and stuff like this. It was kind of nice.
That's amazing. And I think that I've seen different reactions from some of my classical music friends. Some of them immediately said, "Okay, I'm going to go online on Facebook and play music for people,
Yeah.
and so that people won't be sad." And then I had other friends who will remain nameless because I had to pull their teeth out one by one for 7 months. And they were like, "No, I'm not going to scream into this void of live streams." That's a
Yeah.
literal quote. And I had to say, "You have something to say that's unique. Please trust us with this project. It
Yeah.
will be beautiful." And so there's been a variety of reactions, but I think one thing that's impressed me is that a lot of musicians have become stronger advocates for arts funding over this time. And I am so impressed with some people's tech skills now. Like, there are people who are producing their own recordings and videos, and I am in full awe because my maximum is setting up this microphone, making sure I have good settings on GarageBand.
Yeah.
Um, that's my maximum. And
We've
there's
all
people,
gotten a lot better at video editing and that and like compiling. For me at the beginning, it was the compilation videos, right?
right?
You play over a click track and then you put it together afterwards. And at the beginning, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. You played together from here to Montreal." And we had to be like, "Oh, we actually didn't. It's really bad. Like we're tricking. We didn't mean to trick people with any of these, but it's amazing how good a result you can get from an iPhone microphone and video. It's really kind of surprisingly good. Having said that, I'm kind of sick of them and don't want to do any more iPhone recordings. I don't think there's a need for that
Yeah.
anymore. But it
No.
was kind of heartening at the beginning to see these orchestras, to see Rotterdam Phil doing Ode to Joy, to see the Copeland Appalachian Spring that the Toronto Symphony musicians did. It was really heartening to be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, we're not all just sitting at home never to see one another again. It's like we can still connect and we can still do something."
And I think that um, it's just shown a lot of perseverance of spirit. And I just do not think there's been an industry maybe that's been harder hit. We're hard pressed to find a sector that may have been hit as hard. I mean, small
And
businesses.
yeah, and I would say as unevenly, which is one of the weird things. When you think about cruise lines, it's like, well, cruise lines, it's pretty even the way they're hit. It's like every single job in the cruise line business is basically gone for 2 years and maybe will come back, but it's every single one.
Yes.
But like musicians, it's been unbelievably different, right? I'm unbelievably grateful that I work in an institution that can still be paying the musicians to do stuff this year. We don't do any concerts for a paying public, but they've made a commitment to keeping on the orchestra and to continuing to do recordings and continue to do stuff. And that's an incredible thing, right? But I have a lot of friends who are not nearly as lucky. Soloists, people that are freelancing, their income and kind of like their work went from whatever they had to like literally nothing. And so, unfortunately, I would say this pandemic amongst classical musicians has kind of widened a divide that was already becoming somewhat problematic. And
Yes.
now it's really been like, okay, you will probably be okay as long as we can kind of go back to normal at some point. And you now are doing something totally different because you weren't able to make it through. And that's kind of a rough thing to see, that it's not been kind of affecting people evenly across the board.
I've seen that too. Um, I definitely agree. We'll move back into a topic of teaching a little bit. Who
Mhm.
were some of your mentors growing up?
Well, I would say somebody like Lord Menuhin was an incredible inspiration. I don't think I would be lucky enough to call him a mentor because I only did get to work with him 2 times. But
Mm,
just there are certain people that you can work with one time in your life and be so inspired by the way that they think and the opportunity to play with them or something like that really affects you. And he was somebody like that. My main kind of influence was my late teacher, Jonathan Barrick, who was my teacher at McGill for 3 years. And he's one of these, I stayed in such close contact with him after graduating. I remember like when I graduated from school, he was like, "I'm so glad you're not my student anymore." And I was kind of like, "Huh." He said, "Because now we can play together as colleagues," and gave me this huge hug. And, he was somebody that he really taught me how to interact with students and not make them feel like they're kind of like a student and you are the master up here, but that you can find a way to interact and have that you can still be a teacher, you can still be a mentor, but that you can kind of be a friend at the same time, and that there's a transition in that relationship, which is a lovely thing in classical music, right? Because
Yeah.
there's people in the field that are 18, there's people in the field that are 85, and
Mhm.
they can interact and be friends
Mhm.
because of the career that they're in classical music. And that transition can sometimes be awkward. And I
Yes.
learned so much from him how not to make it awkward and how just to be able to like play, interact, and still learn from one another and that sort of thing. I mean, he was a great violin teacher for sure, but also just a great person in that way. And he cared so deeply about every single one of his students. And that was something that really kind of influenced me. He never phoned it in. He never forgot what you were playing in a lesson. He was never like, "Oh, what did you bring today?" He really cared, and he cared how you did, and he cared how you were feeling about how things are going for you.
He's missed a
Yeah,
lot.
absolutely.
Hmm. That's very, very wonderful to hear your reflection on such a teacher. I think that we have a lot of music teachers that tune into this podcast, and I think that for them to hear that, it's just an inspiring reminder of like they don't just come here with their little primer lesson book and sit
No.
down and sanitize the keys and wash their hands and play their scale. It's
Yeah.
so much more.
No, then the teachers that truly care and like what a mark they can leave. You know, after years, you can remember a specific thing that a music teacher said to you or a specific comment when you realize that they really wanted to know what you thought about a certain phrase or something like that. You know, that lasts your entire life.
It's so true. I want to ask a question for our really young listeners out there because I think this podcast would be really good for the even the younger ones. So let's say there's a young violinist out there, they're Suzuki Book 1 or 2, and they're still with like a 1/8 or 1/4 size violin, scratching away. What would you tell them to keep going with their sound? What would you encourage them with?
See, now you're speaking as a pianist. Um, you know, when I was a kid, the 1/8 violins did not sound very good. But I've got to say, like the instruments that they're making for kids, he says, even the 1/8s, the quarters, they actually sound pretty good. You're like, this can sound okay. I would say, have you ever watched a 2-year-old play hockey? It's like a car accident, you
It's
know,
so
when you
cute.
and it's like this is awful to watch. The parents aren't like, "Oh no, this is terrible. We're going to pull you and you have to do something else." They're like, "No, you're 2. Have fun. You enjoy to do it and you'll get better or you won't. It doesn't matter." And it's the
Yes.
same thing with the violinist. It's like you make a scratchy sound when you're starting. That's okay. Enjoy doing it. Like as you play it, you'll get better. We all have ears. We all adjust and it's really fun. I've
Yeah.
never heard a kid ever say, "I don't like playing the violin because I don't like the scratchy sound." They
Hmm.
say, "Well, I don't like playing the violin because my mom makes me practice or my dad makes me practice and I have to do this." But it's only the parents that are like, "Oh, that's a scratchy sound," you know?
Yeah, it's us adults who have the awareness.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say to the kid, keep playing the violin. I would say to the parent, make sure that you don't in any way interfere with your kid's love for the violin if they truly want to do it. It's your job to sit there and bear it. And it
Yeah.
will sound pretty good pretty soon if your kid truly likes doing it and wants to do it.
Do your girls play an instrument?
My eldest, Lucy, used to play the violin, but she has switched into musical theater. So she's a
Ooh,
vocalist
lovely.
and loves it. She always liked the violin, but it was dad's thing. And my youngest, Sabina, plays cello like her mom. And she also does musical theater, but she's still doing the cello. And
Awesome.
so she's a little bit more, it's a little bit more separate from dad sort of thing. So it's like, and then it's nice. I kind of like the cello.
Oh,
It's
it's
not
great.
scratchy.
That's awesome. Now we've gone from like beginner students to, let's say you have an advanced student come into your studio, or you meet them at Orford or Domaine Forget for a masterclass, and they're preparing for an audition, or they're preparing for a big competition. What's your advice to someone in that high pressure situation?
Whew. Well, teaching is an interesting thing, right? Because when you're teaching a little kid, you're trying to keep them playing the instrument. You're trying to make it fun for them, but
Mhm.
you're also trying to set them up in a way that if they decide to pursue it, that they haven't had a handicap, right? So specifically when you're thinking about the violin, it's always this kind of mix when they're young because you want them to have a great time. You don't want to say like you're only allowed to play scales, and if you don't hold your violin perfectly like this, you're not allowed to play this really fun piece. Because then they're going to be like, well, that's not fun. I'm going to quit. But
Mhm.
at the same time, it kind of sucks when you're 18 and you go to university and you're good. And your teacher's like, well, your training hasn't really been good and you're set up all wrong. So now we have to kind of break you down and do these new things. Yep. If you have somebody that's preparing for a competition or a job or something, that's a totally different thing, because you can say to them, look, this is what you need to do. And it might not be fun, the practice and the way you have to practice for the next little while, but this is what it's going to take for you to be successful in this. And somebody that's 22 or 23 can understand, okay, for a long-term gain, there's going to be a short-term, like, this is not really what I want to do, play fingered octaves in my room for 10 hours a day. That's not that fun.
No.
But I think, it's important that people realize what it takes to get good. When I won my job at the OSM, I was practicing for 12 hours a day for a couple of months. I didn't enjoy it. My wife enjoyed it even less. My cat thought it was the worst thing ever, but it's one of those things. It was a short period of time, and I had to learn all of these excerpts that I'd never played before. So it was necessary. Mm-hmm. I would say that we often kind of sabotage ourselves when we're preparing for something that's really important. We give ourselves an excuse. Oh, if I just done that a little bit more, then I would have won. And it's very hard to be successful when you give yourself that excuse, because if in the back of your mind that you're like, well, this one I hadn't practiced quite enough, it's not going to go well. But then I guess you can feel good, because you can be like, oh, well, I'll get them next time. If I had put the time in on that specific excerpt that I didn't do, then I would have won. Right. But until you can kind of put yourself out there and do everything that you need to do the best that you possibly could have done, and accept that if you lose, it might not be because of anything other than like, well, I wasn't good enough on that one day. Mm-hmm. That's a hard thing to do. But until you kind of put in that sort of preparation and practice that you don't have the excuse, it's never really going to be successful, because something will always go wrong.
That's right. No excuse mentality.
Yeah. And accepting that you're not going to win every audition on every day. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad violinist. I mean, classical music is really hard, because if you get a 95 in math, you're doing great. You're like, this is a great mark, and everybody's super happy. If you play 95% of the notes in a Rachmaninoff piano concerto, it's atrocious, right? It's like, you're just like, every single bar, there's a major wrong chord or something.
Yep.
So it's kind of hard. Like, you have to aim for such incredible perfection. You have to be perfect. And then you have to accept that, well, we're all human, so we're not going to be perfect. And that's the kind of thing that I struggle with music, is striving for incredible perfection. And then at the end of the day, being satisfied with what I was able to accomplish, which is not perfection. I'm human, and things are not always perfect. And trying to do better the next time, but accepting that it doesn't, that I don't beat myself up over the fact that something went wrong, or I missed a shift. Or
I am just so I'm really amazed to hear this from you, because performances I've heard from you have been nothing short of incredible, amazing, and inspiring. And I've been talking with a lot of people about why they're hesitant about live streaming, and it comes down to this perfectionism issue.
Yeah.
And it comes down to, this is going to be online. What if I make a wrong note? Well, then you made a wrong note. Horowitz did.
But then everybody can see it because it's on YouTube. In a concert, it's gone. And that's much easier to take, because in the heat of the moment, it's a moment in time, and then it's over. And if there's a mistake, well, it's done. It's over. It's like a tree fell in the forest. Who knows whether it was actually out of tune.
Yeah.
But when it's on YouTube, it's more difficult, because then you can go after and you can watch and be like, yeah, no, that was definitely out of tune. That's no good. It's a tough mix.
It is a tough mix. I want to conclude our interview by talking about my very favorite thing in the world, which is string quartets. Not to belittle this wonderful instrument behind me, but it doesn't hold a candle to string quartet music. Just going to put it out there.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
I won't disagree with you.
Yeah. I'm wondering, why is a string quartet, there's just a certain magic. It's different than piano trio, different than piano quartet, different than piano quintet, which all have beautiful music written for them. There's just something different about a quartet. What is the quartet magic?
I mean, it's a great question. A lot of composers didn't write sonatas for string instruments and piano because they just felt that they didn't match. Like Ravel wrote two, and in the one that we kind of think of as his one, he even said, it's like, well, they inherently are impossible instruments to match, so I won't even try. I'll do something different, right? And with a string quartet, it's a totally different world. I mean, the idea of how you create one sound out of four instruments is kind of the magic, right? And because they can blend, they're all string instruments, and there's so much nuance when you play a string instrument, more so than when you play a piano. Because piano, at the end of the day, the hammer hits a string. Now, don't get me wrong, when you hear somebody like Martha Argerich play, it's amazing the different colors that somebody like that can create from a hammer hitting a string. And it's almost impossible. You're like, how can you do that? But with a string instrument, there are just more physical things that can be done. There's more technical differences. And so the idea of kind of like experience that, and like for people that can come together and find that perfect blend, is kind of incredible. I would also say there's a difference in the way people compose for the string quartet. And especially after Beethoven, the string quartet became very experimental, and it became a way for composers to really test themselves and to develop their craft and try to like put new ideas into their music. And Beethoven, you can absolutely see that, you know, going through the Opus 18s up through 131, 135, you can see him growing as a person. And so when you have somebody that wrote a lot of quartets like that, it's amazing because you can trace their thought process, and you can get to the end and you're like, this is almost insane. The Grosse Fugue, you're like, now it's beyond me, sort of thing. But kind of the idea that the quartet is one of the most personal things that a composer can write, I find really interesting. And the idea that they saved their most personal expression for the string quartet, because this is where they're able to experiment and do something that they're not allowed to do in anything else. That I find interesting when I'm playing them and listening, because I feel like it maybe gets you just that much closer to the mind of the composer.
Well said. I think that's why I'm drawn to the Banff String Quartet competition every 3 years, and the festival the year after. I'm drawn to it not only because my family's in Alberta, but I'm drawn to it because I do feel, especially Beethoven, this guy, I especially feel that is where we get his most personal expression in particular. You know, some of those slow movements, the tenderness, and like, this was not some grumpy man. He had the full range of human emotional expression. And we do see that in the piano sonatas too, but I think that they did write differently for quartet, and that's what makes it special. One last question. If you were going to set people off on a discovery of the Bartók quartets, because I'm trying to dive into those. I'm Hungarian and I'm supposed to love his music, but I have yet to, well, the quartets haven't grabbed me yet. The Concerto for Orchestra, big fan, but the quartets haven't grabbed me. What's the access point for the Bartók quartets?
Seeing them live.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, I mean, I love the Bartók quartets and I love recordings of them. But there's something really different about seeing that interaction between the instruments instead of just having it on a CD. I mean, even video is good, right? But seeing the way four people interact in the string quartet is really part of it. It's not just like hearing, a sound that came out. And seeing people playing the Bartók quartets is amazing because it's wild.
It is.
And I think for me, there's certain pieces that I find incredibly effective live, and on recordings, they just don't get me. Like Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time. Live in a concert hall with an audience, it's one of the most powerful pieces ever written.
Yes.
You listen to it in a recording in your kitchen, it's kind of like you end up fast forwarding and you're like, it just doesn't, it's the space, it's the time, it's being there with other people and kind of being part of it. Some things work really well that way.
It's a choreography on stage too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. But so videos, go look at a video of a great quartet. I mean, there's so many great quartets playing online, but watch a video of them. Don't listen to a CD yet.
That's a good
point.
Then
go back to some of the old, like the Sandor Vague quartet and stuff like that. The sound quality is terrible and all these things, but there's something kind of amazing Hungarian. The language comes through so incredibly strongly in those performances.
It does. To conclude, do you have any performances coming up online that our listeners can tune into?
Oh, what do I have coming up? The Toronto Symphony is going to be releasing of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which we record in December, along with two pieces, one by Gabriela Lina Frank and one by Dinuk Widjaratne, two modern pieces. They're all based on kind of literature as the tie together. So that will be up, I think, March 26th. If you go to the tso.ca on-demand website, you can see that.
Awesome.
what else do we have coming up? There'll be a lot of stuff in the summer. If you can wait till July, Toronto Summer Music will be doing 3 weeks of programming with at least one event every day, and those will all be live streamed for free.
So exciting.
So that you'll be able to catch, and all kinds of little things in between that I record them, and I don't actually know when they get released.
That's what happened.
Like, oh, I did a recording, and it was like, oh, I guess I should
That's
tune
what happens. Things get recorded, and it's like, when is it being premiered? Oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah. There's a on, let me actually, this one I need to check, on March the 21st. Hold on. I can
That's
get March the 21st. Yeah, March the 21st, a festival in Brazil is broadcasting a Beethoven septet that I did last summer. So if you want to go to their website, you have to go to virtuosi.br.
Awesome. Virtuosi.br.
Let me make sure that's actually right. Now I have to test it. It was wrong. Virtuosi.com.br.
Virtuosi.com.br for the Beethoven septet.
Yeah, and if you're really interested, they're also putting up a recording I did of the Sarasate Carmen Fantasy, I think when I was 20.
Oh my goodness.
From their archives, because I went to this festival like many, many years ago.
Throwback.
Yeah, it's something, I'll tell you.
That's awesome.
Hard for me to get through, shall we say.
The spoils of youth.
Yeah, exactly.
It has been so nice to catch up with my very good friend and colleague, Jonathan Crow, the concertmaster of the Toronto Symphony, artistic director of the Toronto Summer Music Festival. We're going to have you back on the podcast because there's so many other things we want to talk about. So this was fabulous. It's so good to see you and to see you're doing well in Toronto.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, and really nice to be back in Vancouver, at least by the internet.
Yes, it rained throughout the whole podcast.
Yeah, it's Vancouver. It's March.
And nobody's surprised.
But don't worry, in July you'll have a drought. So
that's right. That's right. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time today. British Columbia misses you. You're still one of us.
Thank you. I was supposed to be back there all last year, and I'm hoping to be back there in April, actually, in Victoria, but we'll see.
See what happens.
Looks like it might not happen, but definitely at some point.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And we want to thank again our sponsors for our podcast gear, which is Tom Lee Music. My name is Jennifer West. I am the artistic director of Müzewest Concerts and your host for Take Note. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.